All right, is this the video you're talking about where Ben Shapiro goes in on Andrew Tate and Tucker Carlson?
Things. And then there are the pseudo-sophisticates on the right. So let me first say, right up front, America does not have coincident interests with Israel always. They're two separate countries. They're sovereign countries. Israel sometimes wants to do things that are not in America's interest, and America frequently wants to do things that are not in Israel's interest. Like, for example, cut deals with Iranian terrorists, terror regimes. That sort of stuff happens all the time because sovereign countries are sovereign. Also, worth noting, you can be a realist on foreign policy without being immoral. There's a segment of the Republican Party that has basically decided that if the bad idea in foreign policy for years was there's a moral conflict, let's jump in, then the reverse of that, and what we need is there's a moral conflict, let's butt out, take no sides, downplay. Now, there is a happy medium. The happy medium is sometimes it actually is in America's interest to back people who are fighting, monstrous terrorists who behead babies. Sometimes that is in America's interest, actually.
Okay.
Not always. There are times where you can make the case that America should not sacrifice blood and treasure even for a moral good. You can make that case. But being a realist does not mean being a foolhardy isolationist who is somehow morally puzzled by all of this. And this is some of the stuff that
I will just say, I almost guarantee you, isn't Ben's position on Ukraine to just not get involved? And so it's interesting now that he has an interest in Israel because he's Jewish, and that's completely understandable, by the way. It's not like an insult at all. But when it comes to Ukraine, which is having, Russia trying to take away their rights, I'm pretty sure Ben Shapiro's perspective is to stay out of that war. In general. Oh, he even addresses it.
There is an interesting contradiction, I would argue, that a lot of
yeah, we're gonna watch the conversation with Piers Morgan, so we'll see that clip there. But that's what I was saying. So it is interesting because I think, listen, personally, we should, in my opinion, we should definitely be backing. We should definitely be backing Ukraine, and we should back Israel too. Here's my thing, okay? I understand that the conflict is somewhat complicated. You have the Palestinian side expressing their frustrations because Israel took over some of their land. And then you have the Israel side saying, hey, this is our holy land and we were kicked out of this a very long time ago and we just want to have it back. And I understand that it's very complicated, and I can understand why different people would agree with different sides. But Hamas is a terrorist organization that is literally doing some of the most heinous and disgusting things. And to be absolutely honest with you, completely antithetical to our Western values, and all the leftists that are fucking shitting themselves talking about how justifying Hamas and running defense for Hamas, those people would not accept you. They Hamas, they're antithetical values. Okay. They don't respect women. They don't respect children. They don't respect LGBTQ people. And when I say they don't respect, I mean that they try to fundamentally restrict these rights. You can sit here and we can criticize Israel all we want, but they are on the same side of us when it comes to Western values, which is much closer to freedom for women, children, and LGBTQ people. So you fucking people with all the blue hair going, oh my God, I cannot believe Hamas is just doing, they're defending blah, 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 blah. Get the fuck out of here. Hamas is forcing, Palestinians to stay in the Gaza Strip so they can use them as shields, as fucking meat shields to hide their weapons. I mean, I don't know what you want me to tell you. These people, what the fuck is happening? So, listen, personally, I feel really bad for the Palestinian people. I think Hamas is a disgusting terrorist organization. But I support Israel more than I support Hamas, certainly. And I support people who believe in our values, the values of freedom across different marginalized groups, more than people who don't. That's a huge priority for me. I feel terrible for the women, everybody, but the women and children that are under Hamas rule that have their rights restricted because they were born away. And that doesn't happen to nearly the same degree in Israel. And sometimes, to me, it's that simple. So, I don't know. That's all I have to fucking say, bro. So whatever. Let's continue this fucking video, though.
I'm seeing on the right. Let me make clear, Israel has not called on the United States to attack Iran. No one wants a full-scale war with Iran, including Israel. Because you know how many Jews would die in a full-scale war with Iran? A lot. No one wants that. Iran has used Hamas as a proxy here. And even then, Israel is not striking Iran, you may have noticed. Nor is Israel calling on the United States to strike Iran. And yet, there's been this attempt by some on the pseudo-sophisticate right to say, well, no blood and treasure. What? Who's called for blood and treasure exactly? Who? I'm wondering. Dissuading Hezbollah from attacking the north of Israel is an attempt to prevent regional and then global warfare. That's what it is. If Hezbollah gets in, let me explain this to you in small, short sentences.
Ben sounds a little bit like my mom when she tries to have like a Spanish accent when she's talking to her Spanish friends. Hezbollah, you know what I mean? All of a sudden, my mom is like, "Oh, Maria," you know what I mean? When she's the whitest person you know.
So you understand. Hezbollah is a terror group. Hezbollah is backed by Iran. Hezbollah has 150,000 rockets pointed at the north of Israel. If Hezbollah attacks Israel with those rockets, Israel will be stretched to the breaking point. If Israel is stretched to the breaking point, it is not going to worry about the niceties of war. It is going to eviscerate the entire southern border of Lebanon.
Okay.
If Israel eviscerates the entire southern border of Lebanon and also has to then hit all the supply chain roads into the southern border of Lebanon, Syria will get involved. If Syria gets involved, Israel will have to hit bases in Syria. If bases in Syria get hit, Iran will get involved, and Iran will drag in its client state or its sponsor state, Russia. Remember, Iran is a state that is joined with Russia. Russia basically runs Syria at this point. And
oh yeah, well I don't like Russia, so that's it's okay. So now I don't like the Iranian government. Just to be clear, I love the people and I love the food. I love a lot of food. But listen, again, I'm pretty I know that it's not you're not supposed to, but I'm pretty sold on the West. I'm pretty sold that we are flawed, but we are the best thing that exists. Okay, our countries are freer. People have more choice. I know a lot of it is systemic, and part of it is because we have a lot of money and it's more comfortable, and I get it. But I mean, at the end of the day, I value the freedoms of people more than I value anything else. And Western culture has that. And yeah, being real. I mean, and a big part of it is that Western culture doesn't embrace religion as much as other countries, and that is one of the reasons why we are less oppressive to different groups. I mean, let's be fucking real, bro. It's the reality, because we all know conservatives are not trying to sit here and be like, oh yeah, LGBTQ people, oh I'm coming, we need to help them. They don't give a shit, right? So it's not a religion thing. We fortunately our culture, it's a cultural thing. It's probably money. It's probably with more money, people feel less likely to jump into the cope of religion, and better education leans you away from it. And I love God. I love the concept of God, but it's hard to maintain a godly presence when people are shouting fucking, LGBTQ people are groomers because God said so. It's like, holy fuck.
And Russia's already signaling support for all of this. So, if you wish to prevent this cascading into a war into which the United States inevitably will be drawn, it'd be good, some threats. It'd be good? Arming Israel to the teeth so they can actually prevent this from escalating into a broader regional war.
Based.
If the idea in the war in Ukraine is that most of the goals have been achieved, Ukraine has been protected, Kyiv is not going to fall, but the end goal is not clear. The end goal is pretty clear right now for Israel. Depose Hamas.
Okay. I want to watch him call my Twitter exchange with Andrew Tate. Okay.
Baseline.
I covered this at the beginning. So let's see what we got here.
References there a bit of a Twitter spat that I got into with Andrew Tate.
Okay.
So Andrew Tate, he tweeted out in the middle of all this, there is but one certainty in this mess. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Is that really the one sure certainty? That's an interesting certainty.
Well, the Tates don't believe in religion or God. They literally abuse women. I don't we're just at that point. Let's stop pretending that they don't. Oh, well, the trial's not over yet. Yeah, we see all the evidence. We've seen it. We've seen the fucking leaked messages. He's a disgusting predator. So.
That comes out. Literally, he tweeted that in the middle of all of this.
So if you're somebody who's fucking Muslim, you should be embarrassed that Andrew Tate's weaponizing your religion to hide behind the horrible things that he's done. He's using it as a fucking shield.
While the invasion was going on. And then he says, the free thinkers on the American right are screaming for genocide without giving questions as to how Mossad could fail on such a monumental level. A fraction of thought ushered into another psyop. They all cooked for COVID just the same. See, it must have been that Israel
Did I fucking read that? Holy shit, there must be more of the exchange that I missed.
brought it on itself and actually wanted this to happen.
Yeah, originally I was like, Andrew Tate might be kind of right because, he'd sound like he was vaguely calling for peace. But frankly, I've been really looking into this I had to re-educate myself on Israel and Palestine because I had a pretty general understanding of it. And I've been listening to a lot of what Ben has been saying offline too. I've been hearing a few things. I'm like, he's selling me, bro. He really is selling me. he's selling me on some of this shit. So I don't know, bro.
And that's really what this is. Okay, so he responded to a tweet
he's just so charismatic that he can manipulate my fucking malleable brain.
I sent. In the middle of all of this, the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Palestine said, "We are horrified by what is happening and we call for a truce." Okay, they called for a truce, by the way, like the day after the massacre, which is absurd. It's absurd. And so I tweeted, they can right off, because that's exactly right.
Okay.
It turns out that when people murder your kids, you have no obligation to call a truce. In fact, you have a moral obligation not to call a truce. This drove Andrew Tate, who is a very important person because he flexes his muscles a lot and doesn't wear shirts and does a lot of curls. The height of human moral and...
It's so funny, though, that like all of a sudden, like he's literally trying to pull that audience, that red pill audience, so hard by barely giving them criticisms until finally he has a vested interest in the fucking dangers that they pose. When they're shitting on women and all these other things and sex trafficking women, Ben's like, oh, well, there's still some good stuff here. But now it comes to like they're against Israel, basically. At least that's the perception. And all of a sudden he's like, yeah, Andrew's a fucking loser. It's like, finally. In all honesty, you can shit on Ben all you want, but Ben has a profoundly, massively powerful impact on conservatives. And this, to me, is the last fall of Red Pill. Ben Shapiro, the fucking based conservative, probably one of the best, to be honest with you. I don't like everything that he says, but I appreciate him. I appreciate his strength in standing on his perspective here as well, is now disavowing Andrew Tate. Who's left? Tucker Carlson, right? Okay, that guy's a pussy. He's a fucking moron. And I think people are going to see that more and more moving forward, especially once there's like the Ben Shapiro distancing from the situation.
Intellectual achievement is, of course, that you used to punch people in the face. You do curls now, and you openly bragged about trafficking women on webcams. That is. We ought to take you incredibly seriously as a tough guy, because
dude, he finally fucking said it, dude. Holy shit! How many fucking copesters are in the comments saying innocent until proven guilty? Bro, that's fucking super base, dude. Finally, all it took was fucking Israel getting attacked for him to finally say that Andrew Tate is a scum piece of shit fucking sex trafficker. Actually fucking based. Father Benjamin has hit us with a based bomb. He has hit us with the bomb of based. Okay, holy shit. Jesus Christ, dude, that's fucking incredible. Okay.
That. Very, very tough. He wrote, "Mr. Tough Guy, let me assure you, as someone who does his own fighting, as opposed to excitedly encouraging others to do it for him while sitting at home on a comfy chair, peace is always worth a conversation." And I wrote back to him, "Let me assure you, as someone who has not pimped women and bragged about it, the morality requires that those who rape women and kidnap children must be eradicated, not negotiated with." Again, this is a pseudo-sophisticate bullshit nonsense. I'm sorry. What else would you call it when you have terrorists murder kids in their beds, for God's sake, and your immediate response is, well, peace is always worth the conversation. Again, either you're ignorant or you don't give a shit.
He's got a good point.
Those are the only two. There's no third option. And don't give a shit includes you don't like Jews. That's what's in that conversation. And sad to say, but this kind of pseudo-sophisticate point of view has also been mirrored by Tucker Carlson. So Tucker sets up straw men and then burns them to the ground. So he played a clip of Nikki Haley. Nikki was talking, presidential candidate Nikki Haley. She was talking.
I saw this today, and I was like, what the fuck is Tucker Carlson talking about? Honestly, it was like the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
Talking about how Israel has every duty to eviscerate Hamas.
Yeah.
She has not called for an invasion of Iran. She has called for removing $6 billion in funding that America has cleared for Iran. She has called for more sanctions on Iran.
Yeah.
She's not called for a ground invasion or America.
This is what we do. When shit like this happens, we as America, we take our fucking nutsack and we plop it on the ground and we say, fucking show your balls. And we implement sanctions that hurt the other countries more than us. We're sitting here, it's like, oh, we're dealing with like inflation in America. It's horrible. This war this fucking war in Ukraine versus Russia. It's so horrible. Bro, we're not feeling shit compared to Russia. Are you kidding me? Russia's taking the hugest, fattest cock in the ass right now. We just have to like not drive a little less. Like comparatively, we're not struggling as much as we are as Russia's struggling, bro. Like that's the whole point. It's saying like, look at our balls. We can drain our fucking balls more than you, motherfucker. So let's see how far you can go. That's the whole point. Yeah, put sanctions on Iran. Go do it. That's the whole point. We're supposed to be the policemen of the world. When did we lose that like idea? Like, oh, that's one of the things I love about America. We are the best country in the world. We may not be the smartest. We may not be the safest. We may not have the highest quality of life. But we are the strongest and we are the most aggressive motherfucking country in the world. And we are the leader of Western ideology, which is safer than any other ideology. I don't know what you want me to tell you, bro. Just better freedoms for people. Okay, like, oh, fuck it.
American troops to be used against Iran. But watch as Tucker spins this into, well, the only reasonable point of view is to basically go hands off on this whole thing, even morally. Yeah, sure, it's bad, but is it as bad as like things happening in the United States? So here is Tucker finding the morally ambiguous line here somehow.
Tucker's a pussy.
This is not just an attack on Israel. This is an attack on America because they hate us just as much. And what we have to understand is this is the reason that we have to unite around making sure our enemies do not hurt our friends. America can never be so arrogant to think we don't need friends, just like we needed them on 9/11. That's why Ukraine needs us when Russia's doing this. That's why Israel needs us when Hamas and Iran are doing this. And I'll say this to Prime Minister Netanyahu, finish them. Finish them. Hamas did this. You know Iran's behind it. Finish them. They should have hell to pay for what they've just done.
Hey, fucking base, dude. That's all I can say. I mean, sometimes you got to show your nuts.
This was an attack on America, she says, when in fact it was not.
No, she says it's an attack on Western values and our allies. And if we don't defend our allies that share our values, then that is showing a weakness in the world. That's what it's about. That's what it's about, Tucker. You fucking cuck loser. Shut the fuck up. Who cares about what this guy says? He's a loser. Ever since he got fired from Fox News for being a fucking moron, he comes off, he's like, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to talk to Andrew Tate, and I'm going to let him say that it was just TikToks, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to fuck. Like, what are you going to jerk yourself off? It's the only thing that makes Tucker sound intelligent is his confidence. He's a dumb fuck. And he's a pussy. That's what it comes down to.
For that reason, we must, quote, finish Iran, a nation of nearly 90 million people. What are we
that
watching
is not quote.
Here? This is not sober.
That's a paraphrase, a wrong paraphrase.
She's a child, and this is the tantrum of a child. Ignorant, cocksure, bloodthirsty.
Okay.
Yet no one in Washington scolded
Bloodthirsty.
her.
Nikki Haley.
In fact, they aped her hysteria.
They aped her. It's hysteria now. All she said is that Netanyahu should finish off Hamas, and he calls that bloodthirsty.
Yo, that's not
propagandistic nonsense here from Tucker. He's better than this, and it's pathetic that he.
Bro, Ben is making me fucking horny. Dude, Ben's going fucking hard right now. It's crazy.
He engaged in this sort of nonsense. Truly. He's a smart person. And either he thinks you're stupid or he's engaging in stupidity. I don't know which it is.
He's definitely not a smart person.
And Tucker, by the way, then continued along these lines. He did an interview with Vivek Ramaswamy, and he likened what just happened in Israel, the kidnapping of women and their rape. I mean, he's showing video of this happening. Like, as he's talking about this, he compared that to drug overdose deaths in the United States. Now, I believe we should.
Like, listen, we need to prioritize. We need to take care of drug overdose problems and drug problems in the United States, of course. But that is not even close to the same thing as people getting raped. What the fuck is he talking about?
Should fully care about the 100,000 drug overdose deaths that happen in the United States. These are two completely different issues.
Absolutely.
To go this far afield to link the issues, the only reason you're doing this is because you wish to downplay the atrocity that just happened in Israel.
Well, it's this annoying whataboutism, which, again, I'm pretty sure Ben is engaged in as well, where you go, well, there's a bad thing over there, but let's worry about our bad things. Like, we're always going to have bad things, and we can work on two things. Like, this is just how the world, it's like if your washing machine is broken, and then your pipes burst, and you're like, we can't take care of the pipes until we deal with the washing machine. It's like, no, we need to deal with both at the same time. Your pipes bursting is probably also a little bit more of a priority than your washing machine being broken. Okay? So, that's just how the world works. You have to do multiple, usually things happen in threes, fucking three big cocks in your ass at the same time that you got to deal with. This is true. I've taken it before. So,
You're not upplaying the atrocity of what's happening on America's streets. Those are two different types of atrocities. People who are addicted to fentanyl, sticking needles in their arms and overdosing is a
It's a healthcare issue, by the way. Let's get some universal healthcare, Ben. Okay, let's get you doing that next.
Moral blight. It is a moral atrocity and a moral evil for people to kidnap women, rape them, and drag them back to the Gaza border. Those are not the same thing.
It's very similar to what Andrew Tate did, by the way.
And Tucker knows that.
True.
But this is a cheap way of telling you not to look. Don't look. Stop caring. Because after all, what does it matter? What does it matter? Now, again, I don't know who thinks that that's a sophisticated point of view, especially when nobody is calling for America to go to war with Iran. The entire purpose of having an aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean is to avoid that. But here is Tucker playing.
It's a show of force, yeah.
Well, I don't even know the game he's playing. This is just a dumb...
It's a show of force saying, like, if you fuck with us, we're going to fuck with you 10 times harder. And I believe in that mentality.
It's a dumb game.
But you don't have to look far in the United States for moral outrages also on video. And there's not a city in this country, not just the big cities, but cities of 10,000 people. I was in one yesterday that doesn't have some constellation of drug-addicted young people living outside. We call them the homeless. They're drug addicts. And they're addicted to drugs that were imported across an
What does that have to do with prices?
It has nothing to do with it. And the reason that fentanyl is so popular here is because of the fact that people are already addicted to drugs that they were getting from pharmaceutical companies. Like, we've seen this before. Pharmaceutical companies were pushing basically heroin, opiates, right, onto people as medication. The doctors were being persuaded to prescribe this. People got addicted. And then after they were addicted, they couldn't stop doing it. And they started turning to other drugs that are less expensive. So when you talk about the fentanyl crisis, first of all, you don't give a shit, Tucker. Second of all, that problem started with opiates. It started with fucking heroin being prescribed as a drug, as a treatment method. So shut the fuck up. Stop pretending that you care. Because if this wasn't going on, do you think that Tucker's talking about some kind of reasonable reform to help people that are homeless? No, of course not. He's going to sit there and be like, oh, they should just kick the homeless out. Oh, there's a homeless problem in California. We got to kick them out, blah, blah, blah. They don't give a shit about these people. Because if you did, you'd be talking about expanding taxes for expanding welfare programs, because these homeless people, a lot of which are veterans, it's not as easy as get them a job in a house. These people are addicted to drugs. They need social worker support. Tucker's never once even uttered the term social work. He's just playing contrarian. That's all it boils down to.
In China, I don't understand.
More than 100,000 a year. Now, you could call it genocide. You can call it whatever you want, but it's the death of over 100,000 Americans a year and the living death of millions.
Well, you can't
more
call it genocide. It's not genocide.
No, it's not.
So I don't understand.
I'm sorry, people who are addicted to drugs and living outside.
In Israel, and again, I want to add my voice to that because I'm a human being. But
oh, sure you do.
You
sound very outraged.
The outrage among Republican presidential candidates was so much more intense. One of them took to a bullhorn and started yelling about it. I get it, but no one would think to do that about the 100,000 American young people murdered every year. And
because who are you yelling at? Who are you yelling at? First of all, people are on bullhorns yelling about drug overdoses and the open border all the time. All the time. What is he even talking about?
Yeah.
What he's attempting to do is minimize what happened in Israel. He's not attempting to maximize what happened in the United States. He's attempting to minimize, as though America can't walk and chew gum, morally speaking, at the same time.
Yeah, he's 1,000% correct. There's no other argument, because Tucker doesn't give a shit about homeless people at all.
Which is absurd. And those two things are nothing alike. I'm sorry, that is not alike. It is not alike for drug smugglers to smuggle drugs over the border, which someone then takes and shoves into their arm, and then they die of an overdose. That is not the same thing. I promise you, it is not the same thing as a terrorist breaking into your home and murdering your children in their beds in front of you and dragging your wife off to be raped in Gaza. That is not the same thing. Pretending that it is immoral. It's a moral blight. It's idiocy. It's just moral stupidity at the highest level. Of course we should care about what happens with fentanyl. Of course we should care about, we should close our border. Have I been unclear about this? Of course America should have closed borders when it comes to this sort of stuff. I'm on the same side as Tucker on that. I just don't understand why he's not on my side when it comes to Hamas has to be wiped off the face of the earth.
True.
What exactly?
I mean, sure, I agree.
Is the counter argument. It
goes on to Biden's shockingly good speech based. Okay. Yeah, I want to watch this Piers Morgan interview.
Sensitive, 5 days ago, Good evening, London. Welcome to Piers Morgan Unsensitive. 5 days ago, terrorists from Hamas attacked Israel. They murdered and raped civilians. They executed the elderly at bus stops. They took babies and Holocaust survivors as hostages. And they massacred young people at a
could you imagine going through the whole Holocaust and then, like, it just happens again? This is horrific.
festival. It emerged last night, they've even beheaded babies in one village.
That's
More
horrible.
than 1,200 Israelis are now believed to have died, and this brutal attack has dragged Israel into war. Israel had every right to respond with force, as it's done.
Yeah.
The death toll in Gaza is now more than 1,000, and many more will die. Many of those will be completely innocent people, like those who died in the Hamas attacks.
Yep.
Like almost every
And again, it's because Hamas is using human shields to hide their weapons in the Gaza Strip. So
everyone, I've been shocked and sickened by the stories and videos emerging from the attack. I've also been stunned by the moral cowardice of those who celebrated terror as resistance and brutality as politics. I've called out the people who've conflated a terror attack with a geopolitical debate, and I've spoken to fair-minded people on both sides of that debate. I've done all this as a journalist and a human being, but with no personal skin in the game. My guest tonight, on the other hand, is one of the most prominent and influential Jewish commentators on the planet. Ben Shapiro has been visibly moved and enraged by the tragedies unfolding in Israel, and the world has paid attention to his analysis. Tonight I'm giving the show to him as we tackle all the big questions that have come out of this. What is a proportionate response to terrorism? Should the United States be more involved?
yeah, I think the United States should supply Israel with whatever they need. I mean, frankly, we just need to wipe Hamas out.
How do we move forward if everyone involved sees the other side as an oppressor or a savage? And Daily Wire's Ben Shapiro joins me now.
Damn, look at that mean mug, dude. Jesus Christ. It's wild.
Ben, great to have you on the program. I wish it was under different circumstances. I want to ask you, first of all, where were you when you first heard about these attacks?
So I'd been in Israel for several weeks, and we had just gotten home to the United States on Friday morning. Friday night, obviously, is Sabbath for Orthodox Jews. And it also happened to be one of the biggest celebratory
Damn, he was there the whole time before this happened?
days of the year. Shmini Atzeret Simchat Torah was a 2-day, what we call a Yom Tov, which means no electricity. Really, you can't use your phone, you can't use your computer. My security team showed up at synagogue on Saturday morning and started informing me of what had happened. And then news was kind of bleeding throughout the day. There were various sources, maids who were leaving TVs on, for example, or my security team informing me throughout the weekend of what exactly was happening because of the serious security concerns that arise for Jews all over the planet when there's mass terror attack in Israel or
I mean, it's hard to stand on these traditions when you're getting attacked. So the fact that he's checking the news isn't that big of a deal.
Or else. So. And so we were finding out in a lagged time what exactly was happening. Obviously, we couldn't watch the videos. We couldn't see exactly what was happening until it came back online on Sunday night, and we're hit with the news that at that point, 700 Jews have been murdered today. That number has been totaled at well over 1,200 Jews have been murdered in Israel. We started to see all of the pictures on our TVs. I obviously, because I'm in touch with a lot of people on the ground, first responders, people on the ground in Israel, I started receiving extraordinary levels of footage and video and audio and pictures of what exactly had happened in these places. And yeah, I mean, these are images. I've been trying to show them to the audience for one very specific reason. And that specific reason is to understand what evil is. You have to look in the face.
Yeah, you have to see how. I'm not going to watch that video because I know I've kind of skimmed through it before, like last night, I believe it was, or maybe it was this morning when I saw some of it. But it's pretty fucked up shit, man. Of course, but I understand the point of it. It's you got to see the horrible atrocities because there's a. I understand it. There's a lot of people who are like, I feel bad for the Palestinians. Absolutely. And I think that to them, that somehow almost justifies the existence of Hamas. And that's kind of how the mentality is manifesting. But no, that's the answer. That's it. Just no. Just no.
Evil. And I think that we in the West have a peculiar narcissism that everyone thinks like we do, that we value children in a certain way, and so everyone values children in a certain way. That if somebody does something truly terrible or evil, it must be that there was something that quote unquote drove them to. It must be a policy question. But as it turns out, that is not the case, because there's literally nothing I think that could drive people in the West, a normal person, to go and to murder a baby in their crib in a civilian area, to simply walk in and gun down grandmothers, or to rape a woman and drag her back to the Gaza Strip. What could drive you to do that? I can't think of anything that would drive me to do that, but there are a lot of people who are not only driven to do that, but believe full well in the virtue of what they're doing. That is a different mode of thought, and that is not something you can negotiate with.
You've seemed about this, for completely understandable reasons, to have been more enraged than I think I've ever seen you, almost like a simmering volcano as you've talked about this. I want to play a clip from your Daily Wire YouTube channel. You have 6 million subscribers, and this is part of what was, I thought, a very powerful address that you made there.
I am a Jew. Those have been the words of the Jewish people for 3 millennia. Those were the words of the men, women, and children of Masada. Those were the words of the followers of Bar Kokhba. Those were the words of Jews in Granada in 1066 and the Rhineland in 1096, and Khmelnytsky from 1648 to 1657, and Kishinev in 1903, and Hebron in 1929. Those were the words of Jews in Auschwitz and Treblinka. Those were the last words of Daniel Pearl. And those are my words too. They're the words of my parents, the words of my wife, my children. Over the weekend, my people, the Jewish people, were attacked and murdered, mutilated. Our women were raped. Our children were kidnapped. This happened millions of times before to millions of Jews across history. Jew hatred exists because evil exists, because there are people who have, for literally all of human history, hated the Jews and sought to strike at them while they are weak, who have blamed the Jews for their own problems, who have crafted complex conspiracy theories about the supposed power of the Jews, who have sought to destroy, to murder, to mutilate, to rape the Jews, from Pharaoh to Haman, from Hitler to Hamas.
Yeah, I remember listening to that speech. I remember hearing about that speech. You know, I listened to it. I think on TikTok actually. So,
what reaction have you had to that, Ben?
I think the reaction has been pretty strong and overwhelmingly positive. I think there are a lot of people, not only Jews, mostly my audience is people who are not Jewish, obviously, who understand the history of the Jewish people, who understand what it means when the greatest slaughter of Jews on a mass scale happens since the Holocaust, and who understand that it is inextricably linked to a history of anti-Semitism that goes back.
Super chatted $4.99. So we just forget 70 years of human rights violations committed by Israel.
So listen. What you're telling me is that you think it's okay to murder babies and rape children, or murder children, rape women, and drag them through the street. That's all you're telling me right now. That's why you retracted that dumb fucking message. If there was advocacy from Palestine, even some conversation about war, I would understand it. But what's the justification for murdering babies and beheading children and shooting people's kids and dragging women out and raping them? That's your response? Oh, like what? What are you, a fucking idiot? Like, that's just a dumb thing to say. It's just stupid. You're an idiot. You're just dumb. You want to have advocation for Palestinian people? That's fine. That's not with Hamas. Hamas isn't advocation for Palestinian people. Hamas is a terrorist organization that murders and rapes women and children. That's it. That's all it comes down to. They engage in atrocities. We have like articles of war of the things that are supposed to be off limits when it comes to different types of war and different types of advocation, thinking that those are some of the things that are off limits. So like if your first thought is like, yeah, you know what, I kind of think it's okay to rape women and kill kids. Like, okay, that's cool that you think that, but you're a fucking idiot. I don't know what to tell you. So it's just a dumb thing to even suggest. But okay, whatever, man. Good for you.
Thousands of years. I mean, this extermination level anti-Semitism, what you see from Hamas, it's literally part of
You did say that. I never said that. There's the reason you literally retracted the message. You did say that. Your response wasn't, there needs to be a response, but this is too much. Your response was, oh yeah, you know, kids were getting murdered and women are getting raped in the streets. But like, what else are we supposed to do? That's what you're saying. You're too stupid to realize that's what you said, but that's what you're saying. You're just a fucking idiot that doesn't understand how to talk because you're an uneducated fucking moron. That's all it comes down to. Your first priority when hearing that people are getting dragged through the streets, raped and murdered, children, is what else are we supposed? That's what your response is, basically. That's your response. Your response isn't, this is horrible, but I do understand that Palestine needs some kind of advocation. That's not what you said. You're engaging in the hate. You're engaging in the fucking fear-mongering. You're engaging in justifier language for the horrible things that are happening. Whether you want to believe that or not is your fucking problem. I don't care. But no, that's not at all. Your priorities are just not fucking there. Okay, I understand the conflict is complicated. People in Palestine want their land back, just like people in Israel do too. They were kicked out a long time ago. Complicated situation, but, you know, be careful the language you use.
Charter. And so the attempt to treat them as a normal political body obviously is foolish. I think that a lot of people resonated to that. It's certainly the strongest I felt about anything that had happened in my lifetime since 9/11. as an American since 9/11, and as a Jew. Obviously, I'm watching as people that I know, people I'm friends with, are getting called up to go to the military and serve in Gaza, try to protect the Israeli citizenry who are Jews and Arabs, who are Christians and Jews and Muslims. And I'm watching as there are people out there who are rallying on behalf of actual terrorist groups murdering children. I mean, it's an amazing, I would say, exposure of ignorance at best, and Jew hatred at worst.
Do you have any personal connection to anyone whose life was taken?
I don't. I'm lucky. I would say that I have. Certainly, I know a lot of people who do. So the way to talk about the Jewish community in general, there are not very many Jews on the planet. Due to conspiracy theories, people tend to think there are tens of millions of Jews on the planet. The grand total number of Jews on planet Earth is about 15 million. About 7 million who live in the state of Israel. There are about 6 million who live in the United States. And what that means is that in general society, you think, 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
They're all born into trauma and have trauma against Israel after something like that. Bro, not for nothing, but the heart of their trauma comes from Hamas. Hamas is using the people in the Gaza Strip as fucking shields to hide their weapons. You think it's all Israel, but the terrorist organization that was born from it is the one causing this type of trauma. Like, that's a massive factor. Okay? That's a lot of what it comes down to. I understand that there are two sides, but like Hamas isn't the response. They are causing a big part of the trauma. You can only be so empathetic to vile terrorist organizations. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Yeah.
7 degrees of connection. You can find anyone among Jews. That's one. That number is one. So I certainly know an enormous number of people who have had people who are kidnapped, who've had people who are murdered. I certainly know personally an enormous number of people who are on the ground right now. I know Americans who are in Israel with me who decided to stay over the last day of the Yom Tov, over the holiday, and ended up basically getting stuck there because the airport was shut down because of rocket attacks. And when the call went out to everybody with medical training to show up to help, I know American doctors who showed up at the Gaza border to simply set up triage stations and help people out. So, I mean, it's a very small community. It's a very close-knit community, obviously.
You've spoken a lot about Hamas before, called them evil. You did a second video called Make God Avenge.
And also, to that point, just to be very clear about this, like, well, they're born into trauma. Okay. Let's say that a pedophile violently raped a child, and then you found out that pedophile was molested as a kid too. Would you go, well, it's kind of okay because he was molested? Or would you go, okay, we understand that you had a horrific past, but what you did was unforgivable and disgusting, and you need to be dealt with extremely. So, we can be empathetic if we want, but empathy has to end at some point. And it needs to be contextualized. You don't believe, like, I don't think that you necessarily believe everything you're saying. I think that you're really disconnected from the situation, which all of us are. And for you, it's easier to kind of weigh in and be like, yeah, but like, I understand that people are being violently murdered. Little babies were having their heads cut off. I understand that. But, also they had this issue. And it's like, okay, where do we, that's our American disconnect. That's our privileged first world country disconnect from the situation. That's what it boils down to, And again, we're talking about Hamas, a group that doesn't value you as a person. They don't value women. They don't value children. They don't value LGBTQ people. They don't value freedom. They value value domination of, let's be real, like some form of a patriarchy. They will oppress their people and their citizens violently. So, I'm not going to be on the side of those people. I don't care how tragic your past is. That's disgusting to just perpetuate more hatred and aggression and death and destruction and persecution of your own people. That's all it is. So that's where I'm at. That's just where I'm at.
Their blood, in which you said that Hamas, in some ways, they are worse than Nazis, which some viewed as a very provocative statement. Why did you say that about them?
The Nazis, here's a phrase I'll never use again, at least the Nazis. So at least the Nazis attempted to hide their crimes. So the Nazis obviously mechanized death. They had Einsatzgruppen units that drove up to Jewish villages and would mow people down. And then they would bury them, and then they would try to hide the crimes. And it took the Nuremberg team years to undig all of that material. In this particular case, you have Hamas terrorists who are murdering Jews in their beds and then live streaming it and celebrating it and bragging about it and talking about how incredible it is and blasting that sort of stuff out. I mean, the videos that I've been showing on my show, a lot of them are coming directly from Hamas. I mean, it's Hamas that is taking contemporaneous video of this sort of stuff. And that's a whole new level of evil. I mean, to celebrate this sort of stuff, to treat it as a triumph. I mean, I think the thing that people really have to realize here is this is not a military operation. This was not a military operation. I mean, people have compared this to, for example, the 1973 Yom Kippur War. That was an awful moment in Israel's history when it was taken by surprise by the combined Arab armies around it. But that was a military operation with a military objective, which was to seize territory. This is not a military operation with a military objective. This was an operation directed specifically at civilians. And when we see death in Gaza, which we're going to see, and the images are going to be horrifying and terrible, it is important to understand that the reason that is happening is not just because Hamas crossed the border and murdered a bunch of civilians in their beds, but also because Hamas literally hides its weaponry behind civilians. Israel is currently, right now, sending out messages to Gazan civilians, telling them to get...
Yeah, to tell them to get out, and Hamas is not letting them leave. They want civilians to leave. Hamas is using those civilians as a shield. So again, when we're like, well, Israel's really oppressive to Palestine, Hamas is really oppressive to Palestine, to Palestinians. They don't care about their own people. If you're like, oh, hey guys, I'm fucking Hamas. I advocate for my Palestinian people. By the way, we use our people as human shields to hide our weapons. Oh, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, you definitely are advocating for those people. Hamas doesn't give a shit about fucking Palestinian people. They don't care. They don't. This fucking defense run for Hamas, like, oh, well, you don't understand. They've been oppressed. So now they're oppressing their own people worse than they were oppressed? Yeah, it makes perfect sense. These are violent, hateful, it's a terrorist organization. I don't care about Hamas. I care about the Palestinians. Hamas is oppressing them. Probably worse than Palestine ever did or would. So, what do you want me to tell you?
Out of particular areas, and Hamas is sending out full-scale messages telling people to ignore those messages and to stay where they are. Now, Hamas there's a reason why their headquarters were for years located underneath a hospital. I mean, it's what they understand that the West again has a peculiar narcissism where we think we would never put our military hardware below a hospital.
No, it's that the West has a value greater than Hamas for human life. That's why they're doing that. That's why they're like, you know what? Let's goad them into attacking a fucking hospital. Because they don't care. They don't care about people. Hamas doesn't care about their own people. That's all it comes down to. And these little fucking moron blue-haired lefties that come into the stream and cry about it, you'd be the first on the chopping block if you ever met somebody from that terrorist group. I don't know why you don't understand that, but you live in a fucking sheltered little baby world.
Be insane.
How do I feel about Palestinians? I understand. I completely respect Palestinians and their fight for wanting to have their independence. I respect Palestinians. I don't respect Hamas. And I also imagine a lot of Palestinians don't want to be genocided by their own by Hamas, dude. I don't understand. So.
And so if Israel blows up a hospital, it must be that Israel's doing that because they're targeting civilians. Hamas knows that. That's why they're doing it. That's why they're doing it.
It doesn't sound like I do. You're a fucking idiot then. It doesn't sound like I have empathy for I've said Hamas 1,000 times. You're an idiot. Just fucking leave the stream and unsubscribe. You're so fucking stupid. There's no way that you can interpret what I'm saying that I don't feel bad for them when I'm sitting here and half of my advocacy is that Hamas is oppressing its own people and leaving them in situations where they are getting fucking killed because they want to use them as fucking meat shields because Hamas has no value for any human life. They don't care about Palestinians. And you're like, well, it sounds like you don't care about Palestinians. It sounds like you're a fucking moron that doesn't know how to fucking listen. It sounds like you've made a decision based on all the dumb fucking lefties that you engage with, and that's fine. And you've decided that I am a fucking heartless piece of shit because I live in a real world where sometimes, unfortunately, the terror is that sometimes you have to meet force with force. When people are being dragged, when babies are being murdered, people are being dragged through the streets and they're being killed, when they're being fucking raped, these people don't value human life. That's the reality. Hamas doesn't value human life, and you don't either. That's what it comes down to. You're a dumb fucking kid who has decided that you saw some TikToks and you want to be fucking based, cool, and anti-American, and you don't give a shit about anybody. What's happening. That's what's happening. Or you joined in for 5 seconds. You're not listening to what I'm saying. You're deciding to filter my perspective through your own decision on how you want the situation to engage. It's how you've decided on what's happening in the situation, and nothing that I could say would ever communicate that I care about Palestinian people and that I take them as a factor, because I'm not agreeing with you 100%. It doesn't matter how many times I explain myself. That's it. That's what it boils down. You're the same as the person who came in here and I was like, it's horrible that Hamas is raping women and killing children. And you're like, yeah, what else are they supposed to do? Like, you're a fucking idiot. That's what it comes down to. You don't care. You don't care about, you're sitting here telling me I don't care about Palestinians. You don't care about people. You don't care about Israeli people. Like, you don't care. That's what it comes down to. I don't know what to tell you. I'm getting fucking triggered and stunlocked and I don't care. Like, you're just being stupid. You're just being fucking dumb.
They literally hide their rocket launchers behind apartment buildings in the hope that Israel will strike back and have to kill civilians in the process. Israel cares significantly more about civilian casualties in Gaza than Hamas ever has.
I'm sure that's true.
There have been so many horrendous images and videos. The poor girl from the music festival taken away on the motorbike was just bone-chilling to watch. I saw something on CNN yesterday with Jake Tapper where he's interviewing the relative of his grandmother, who was murdered, and Hamas posted the video of her being murdered onto her Facebook page so her family would watch it. Jesus. I mean, when you hear that, it's sort of unconscionable. It's kind of beyond depravity. This is inhumanity.
I mean, Piers, you're in the business of words, and I'm in the business of words, and I've found myself repeatedly over the last few days unable to find words to describe the kind of thing that we're seeing. And again, we stretch, I think, in the West, and I stretch as an American. I think we all stretch to try and find, what would drive somebody to do something like this. And the answer sometimes is that they're I don't know how to say this otherwise. They are not like you. Hamas is not like you. They don't think like you. They don't have the same priorities as you. They don't have the same values as you. Don't. And that means that any attempt to buy them off is bound to fail. And this is inextricably intertwined with the history. I mean, the fact is, Israel turned over the Gaza Strip in 2005. There were no Jews living in the Gaza Strip since 2005. The areas that were attacked in this particular terrorist attack are not areas that are in the so-called settlements, the Shtachim, in Judea, Samaria, what's called the West Bank. That's not the area that was attacked. The area that was attacked has been sovereign Israeli territory since 1947-48. And that territory was attacked from across a border that is entirely controlled by Hamas, which has utilized pretty much every dollar that has flooded into that region over the course of 20 years from America.
You watch Ethan's take and you got stunlocked in his chat. His ticks were acting up, did he? Why? What was Ethan's take on it?
From Europe, taxpayer dollars that have been used to build up these terror capabilities. And every time there are cement shipments into the area ruled by Hamas, Hamas has used it to build terror tunnels. Pipes that have been sent into the area ruled by Hamas that were meant to build sewage systems have been repurposed and used for rocket tubes. I mean, it's utterly insane. And to try and come up with some sort of territorial solution, this is really just a territorial dispute. It is not a territorial dispute. It is a genocidal group that makes clear its own intentions. I don't know how many times people have to tell you who they are before we believe them. The reason that I've been saying that Hamas is genocidal for literally my entire career is because they say in their own founding documents that they are genocidal. It's not as though they're attempting to avoid culpability or responsibility for this. They are saying it out loud. They're begging you to take them seriously.
Well, they're also terrorists. I mean, let's just be crystal clear. This is an act of terrorism that we saw at the weekend, the worst since 9/11, one of the worst terror attacks in modern history. And yet you have mainstream media, the BBC in Britain, refusing to describe Hamas as terrorists. They call them militants. Even John Simpson, one of their senior foreign correspondents and editors.
No, Hamas is a terrorist organization. I don't understand like how to communicate this to people, but when it comes to war, there's supposed to be things that are off limits. And Hamas doesn't care. They don't value human life. And if they don't value human life, then they're a terrorist organization. I don't know what to tell you. So, yeah.
So it's not a journalist's role to call groups like Hamas terrorists. He says calling someone a terrorist means you're taking sides and ceasing to treat the situation with due impartiality. The BBC's job is to place the facts before its audience and let them decide what they think honestly and without ranting. That's why in Britain and throughout the world, nearly 500 million watch, listen to and read us. There's always someone who'd like us to rant. Sorry, it's not what we do, but I don't think it's about ranting. to describe acts of terror as being committed by terrorists. And the New York Times apparently today actually changed the wording of a story they put online and changed the word Hamas terrorists to Hamas gunmen, as if they're almost terrified, literally. I mean, how ironic, of using the word terror.
But yeah, they're terrified of getting canceled by a dumb fucking audience of morons. Like, that's really all it comes down to.
Terrorists. But what is it about mainstream media, two huge examples of it, New York Times and the BBC, that they won't just call this what it is?
I think that a lot of these groups are afraid of the political implications of just calling a terrorist a terrorist. I mean, when you acknowledge that the government of the Gaza Strip is in fact a terrorist government, that has some pretty large-scale implications for a lot of the political agendas at play. Because, of course, the great sort of dream of the West since at least the Oslo Accords has been that territorial concessions and that economic concessions would solve this problem. And when it turns out that an entire area is governed by a government that is in fact a terrorist government, is it actually?
Well, no, if there are better economic aspects of it, like, of course there'd be a better culture going on over there. Absolutely. So Hamas needs to be eradicated, and then Palestinians need to have their own leadership. Like, that's not terrorists that don't value their own lives. So that's what really needs to happen.
Actual terrorist group. Then that has some pretty significant implications moving forward for the prospects in the region. And it also suggests that Israel has a moral duty, which it absolutely does, to protect its own citizenry by eviscerating that terrorist group from the planet.
Sure.
And the word terrorist has a definition. And that definition, by any stretch of the imagination, is fulfilled by what Hamas is. I mean, the BBC's explanation is so bizarre. It's almost like suggesting that if you found a man who had murdered his wife in an apartment and you reported on that, you didn't call it murder. You just said that someone was killed. A person was killed, and the person was convicted of murder, and you still said they're not a murderer. We don't make judgments over here and use language like the word murderer because that would carry some moral implication. Well, yes, it turns out that murdering entire families, slaughtering entire families, burning them. I mean, some of the stuff that I've been tweeting out, which is stuff I'm getting, again, directly from first responders on the ground. I mean, just a few moments ago, I tweeted, I wish I didn't have to tweet out these photos, but I think people need to understand the consequences of failing to see evil for what it is. It was a photo of a group of people in a kibbutz called Kibbutz Be'eri, which is, again, near the border where 100 bodies were found. And they were attempting to simply escape, and Hamas stopped the car and burned these people alive. I mean, I don't know how you don't call that. What other goal could you have but to obscure the morality of the situation if you refuse to call things what they are? It boggles the mind. It truly does.
I mean, what also boggled the mind for me was Black Lives Matter Chicago, which had a Twitter account with 60,000 followers. They actually posted a caricature image of a paraglider saying, "I stand with Palestine." The paragliders, of course, were the ones who flew in and killed all the people at the music festival.
That's disgusting. If them saying "I stand with Palestine" is perfectly fine. I mean, I respect standing with Palestinians, not Hamas. But if that was if that's a reference to apparently using paragliders to come in and kill a bunch of Israeli people, that's just disgusting, like pathetic shit. You can say that you stand with Palestine without fucking making it about the death of Israel people, that apparently is what it's about.
What did you feel when you saw that?
I mean,
what about Israel cutting power and water supply to Gaza? Yeah, they're basically in a war now. Why wouldn't they do that? I don't know.
Unsurprising, only in the sense that Black Lives Matter as an organization had all sorts of solidarity statements about Palestine going all the way back to the original movement in 2014, 2015. But seeing them actively...
Like, that's a blockade that started, 17 hours ago? Israel has cut off all supplies of food and water. Yeah, like, why? Of course it's going to happen. They just got fucking attacked and their people were raped and killed and murdered. What the fuck are you talking? Like, of course it's going to happen. Yeah, that's very normal to cut off supplies. It's the first thing that you would typically do, because if you can starve people out, they'll usually surrender, and then you can stop dealing with the bullshit. Like, that's usually the first thing to happen.
Take up the imagery of an actual terrorist attack. That's what that is. Palestinians are not famous for their hang gliding. And the only reason why that is the image is because literal terrorists use paragliders in order to murder civilians at an electronic dance music festival, by the way, attended mostly by people of the political left. I mean, those are not right-wing Israelis who are dancing at an EDM festival on a Saturday. That's not the way that works. It's only astonishing in either the moral blindness or the anti-Semitism. And at a certain point, the moral blindness becomes the anti-Semitism, because when you are celebrating active Jew murder and you are saying that that's solidarity, that's a pretty incredible thing. I'd also like to point out here that the argument in favor of Palestinian self-determination did not need to be threatened by any of these people. All they could have said is, Hamas does not represent Palestinians. This does not have any implications for Palestinian self-determination. Hamas is a terrorist group, and they ought to be eviscerated, and they ought to be replaced by a better government that could make peace. Like, none of this is particularly hard. The fact that they're lumping together Hamas with the Palestinian cause says an awful lot, and it doesn't say anything good.
In one of the videos, you say the only solution is for Israel to annex the Gaza Strip and kill enough sons of bitches to make sure this isn't a problem again. You say anyone who calls for a ceasefire.
I'm assuming he's referring to Hamas, yeah. And I mean, Ben is Jewish, and a bunch of Jewish people just died. So even if he didn't have a perfect emotional response, I don't really fault him for that.
Ceasefire is a terrorist sympathizer under these circumstances.
What happened in Israel happens to Palestinians every day. You're saying every day Israelis are going and dragging Palestinians through the streets and raping them and killing their children? No, that's just it's not happening. You're on a pure fucking cope. Sorry.
I got a lot of pushback. I guess this comes to the point of appropriate response.
And if it's happening to Palestinians every day, it's because of Hamas. It is not because of, the Hamas would be the one carrying those. Again, Hamas doesn't care about Palestinians. I don't know how hard this is to fucking comprehend, but.
How far do you go? How do you isolate genuine Hamas from perhaps completely innocent Palestinians in Gaza, of which there will be many? One person called you a genocidal warmonger for that rhetoric. And there's a person called Mohammed Hijab in a video called in responding to Ben Shapiro on Israel. He says this.
First and foremost,
yes, you're going to send me the proof that the Israel government is going and dragging Palestinians through the streets and raping them and killing their children. You're going to show the government, because that's what Hamas effectively is at this point. It's like it's the terroristic governmental rule that is oppressing their own people. You're going to show me that. You're going to show me proof of that. That's fucking crazy. Show that to me. I'd love to see that proof of the Israel government beheading children and raping women in the streets. Show me that fucking proof, man. Show me, please. Send it to my Instagram.
I'll say, yes, we condemn any woman, child, or whatever it may be that's being killed who's Jewish and who's not a non-combatant. But why is it the case, Ben? Huh? Why is it the case that none of your colleagues or you have been able to offer one single condolence, one single condemnation, one single word of sympathy for any of the Gazans that have been killed? Don't try and smear us. Don't try and slander us. Don't try and attack. Don't try and produce red herrings. And I think you're an ass, a jackass. Whoa. And we're not talking about Hamas. We're talking about children here. We're talking about women here. We're talking about elderly people. You make me sick. You make me sick.
What's your response to that, Ben? I mean, that will be, I'm sure, a reaction you've heard from a lot of people. What do you feel about that?
I mean, my obvious response is, of course, I feel horrible for the people who are being held by Hamas in a state of tyranny for the past 15 years. Hamas was the elected government in Gaza in 2006. There hasn't been an election since then. All the people who are today ranting, as you heard Mohammed Hijab doing right there, I don't hear them talking about liberating Gaza from Hamas, which is the greatest threat to the way of life of Gazans on planet Earth. Again, I have nothing but sympathy for Hamas, for the people that Hamas is governing, or the people that Hamas is exploiting, really. I have nothing but sympathy for civilians there. Israel has to defend itself. I don't understand exactly what the expectation would be here. Is the expectation that because Hamas uses human shields, that Israel therefore has to go home and wait to have its people murdered again? Israel tried it the way that Mohammed Hijab and others would like. Israel literally pulled, in 2005, they literally pulled thousands of Jews out of the Gaza Strip. It was called the disengagement, and it was massively unpopular in wide swaths of Israel. They pulled out, they built a wall, and they basically said, go ahead and govern yourselves. And this is the result of that. You think anyone in Israel, no one in Israel wants to reoccupy the Gaza Strip. No one. That's why Israel has been studiously avoiding reoccupying the Gaza Strip since 2006, despite the fact that they have been living underground in large parts of Israel for weeks at a time because of rocket attacks that have been fired on a regular basis from the Gaza Strip into major cities.
But let me ask you this, Ben.
Ashkelon.
In Gaza, you have 2 million people, many of whom are young people. Pretty hopeless conditions to live in. I think people would agree with that. Sure. Not much chance of getting out of there.
Hamas doesn't let them get out of there. I mean, this is what it boils down to. If there was a reasonable government that could actually work with people, we wouldn't be seeing this issue. But you have a terrorist organization as a government, of course other governments aren't going to, other governments, especially Western ones, aren't going to be as desperate or willing to help. So yeah,
live in very densely populated areas. We know from in the last 24 hours that Israel controls water, controls energy, power going in there. Many would see that that is a control that Israel shouldn't have if you want to afford equal rights to people living in Gaza. And then it comes down to proportionate response and how you try and, like I say, how do you attack Hamas, given they're all over Gaza, living amongst the general population? How do you attack and isolate genuine members of Hamas?
I mean, I don't think it's, I don't know if you can.
Genuine terrorists.
It's the unfortunate reality of the world. They decided to orchestrate a terrorist attack, and then you have to respond by getting rid of them. And since they use human shields, it just puts people in a really fucked up situation. What are you supposed to do? Do nothing, get attacked, and do absolutely nothing, which all it's going to do is to tell Hamas that they can just keep doing it and they won't have any consequences. Hamas is using their own people as a shield because they don't care. They elected a government of oppressive terrorists, and now, like, it's really unfortunate. And until there's like some kind of a counter cell in Palestine that's saying we want to have a different government, we want to lead ourselves, we want to make this, that, and the other decision, there's what can we do? And maybe that exists. Maybe I'm just uneducated on that. But what else can we do?
From the civilian population. And given that is almost impossible, clearly, what is a proportionate response to what's happened here?
Well, frankly, I don't believe in proportionate response to terrorism. I believe that the way that you stop terrorism is with wildly disproportionate response. That doesn't mean in terms of targeting civilians. It means in terms of killing as many terrorists as humanly possible and allowing them to dictate the terms of engagement by hiding behind civilians in areas that they're supposedly responsible for, means that the only option for Israel is to surrender to Hamas's hatred of its own citizens, its willingness to use its own children as human shields. No country worth its salt could ever do that. No government trying to protect its own citizens could ever do that. What exactly is the alternative option other than for Israel to try to kill as many of these terrorists into post-Hamas and hopefully help put in place some sort of international overseen community that would actually govern the Gaza Strip in a rational, reasonable way that actually maximizes the possibilities of its citizens? Israel, over the course of the last year, allowed some 15,000 work permits to Gazans. Many of those work permits, we're now finding out, were used by terrorists in order to cross the border. The fact that Israel controls the water and the power, the reason that Israel controls the water and the power is specifically because if they did not control the water and the power, Hamas would be right now holed up with the water and the power indefinitely. I mean, the fact is that the reason that Israel controls, for example, the sea border is because if they did not, there were attempts to ship weapons in from Turkey multiple times. The impossible situation in which Israel finds itself with regard to the Gaza Strip is mirrored only by the impossible situation in which Gazan civilians find themselves. And all of that, every single iota of that, is the result of Hamas, which means unless there is a change in status, in which Hamas is removed from power, in which someone else is put in charge, this is going to continue. Again,
but I would
Israel,
argue
10,000 Jews want to die going into the Gaza Strip in order to defend their citizens?
I agree with you, but I would also say that I think that it would also benefit any chance of a peace settlement that if Netanyahu wasn't in charge anymore. I mean, apart from anything else, this is an unbelievable breach and failure of security and military. I think part of that can be apportioned.
What are they referring to? The fact that they didn't really have any intelligence that told them it was going to happen, despite the fact that Israel has like the best, whatever you want to call it, the best intelligence in the fucking Middle East. Like, yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't really know the specifics or the politics around specifically Netanyahu, so I can't talk too much about that. But
to the extraordinary social unrest that's been enveloping Israel since his cabinet, full of a lot of right-wing headbangers, frankly, some of whom have actually called themselves fascists, have tried to take on the judiciary and the Supreme Court. I don't feel comfortable about that. What do you feel about that? And do you feel that Netanyahu is the right person? Does it need a completely...
I mean, from an optics perspective, you probably shouldn't change the leadership in the middle of some kind of a war or some kind of dispute like this. But I mean, again, I don't really know specifically
leadership now, both in Palestine and Israel, to try and get to somewhere approaching peace.
The democratically elected government of Israel has not had a change in policy, despite the fact that until very recently, Netanyahu was not the prime minister of Israel. It was a joint government run by Naftali Bennett, as well as by Yair Lapid, who's a member of the hard left who dramatically opposes Benjamin Netanyahu today. They formed a unity government between Benny Gantz, who's a member of the center left, and Benjamin Netanyahu, who's a member of the center right, Likud party in Israel. This is not, when it comes to foreign policy, the reality is that since the rejection of any peace deal by Mahmoud Abbas in 2009, when Ehud Olmert was the prime minister of Israel, there's been very little disagreement between any of the parties with regard to foreign policy because they do not have a peace partner. The Oslo process was killed by the Palestinians, and it was killed by the Palestinians when they rejected multiple peace offerings by Ehud Barak, by Ariel Sharon, by Ehud Olmert, over and over and over again, by Yitzhak Rabin, by Shimon Peres. Benjamin Netanyahu himself, in the Wye River Accords of 1998, handed over significant portions of the West Bank to the Palestinians. So you can say that Netanyahu's a problem. That's fine. But the reality
I was
is
really
that
asking you whether I was asking you whether you feel he is a problem, that actually all the division that's been caused by his attempt to usurp the power of the Supreme Court, as many people see it, all that division in Israel has actually diminished his...
Hey, thank you so much for the 10-month small gut from Skit Widget. Thank you for having a reasonable take. I appreciate you agreeing with my take.
his authority. And that
I'm staying away from reading the chat so I don't get stung like by fucking morons.
come at a time when you really need somebody with real authority.
Well, I mean, I don't think that right now that's really the question, considering, again, it's a unity government, and I'm talking to everybody in Israel, and all of those divisions heal up in a moment when your children are being slaughtered at the border, as it turns out. So,
True.
All of the judicial reform conversation is a separate conversation. We can critique how fast they went in terms of this coalition. They went too fast. They scaled it back. There were serious divisions in Israeli society about what kind of power the judiciary ought to have. There are many people on both sides, actually, who believe the judiciary had too much power. There are a lot of people on both sides who believe the government went too fast on that. Internal political divisions have become completely irrelevant here. If Netanyahu were replaced tomorrow by Benny Gantz, which is what a lot of Israelis would hope for, if that were to happen literally tomorrow, nothing would change. Nothing would change. And the reason nothing would change is because, again, this is an issue. This particular issue is about Hamas. This has nothing to do with the constituency of the Israeli government. You could find the most left-wing person in Israeli politics right now, which would be Yair Lapid. You could put him back in the prime minister seat, and he would be forced with exactly the same decisions that Netanyahu is faced with right now.
How do you see, take me forward 20 years. In a dream scenario, how does the region look?
I think we just need to build an aircraft that's the exact shape of that territory, and then Israel can have one. Can have the upper or the lower. You know what I mean? They can each choose one. One gets the upper, one gets the lower. Everybody, we're all good. We're good.
In a dream scenario, economic development, which I think is what the Abraham Accords were about and what the burgeoning Saudi peace deal was about. And by the way, the burgeoning Saudi peace deal is the reason that Hamas did this at the behest of Iran. They were afraid of a regional realignment that would create a Sunni-Jewish alliance.
Right.
Oriented largely against the Shia power of Iran, which is spread through Lebanon, Syria, and now down into Hamasistan. The economic development is the only way to move forward for the region. That was the premise of the Abraham Accords. Again, it was the premise of the nascent Saudi peace deal. Israel would love to do that with the Palestinian Authority. They would love to do that with anyone governing the Palestinians to provide better economic conditions. I mean, one of the great ironies of all this is that 20% of Israel's population is Arab. The Arabs in Israel earn a far better income. They have far better GDP per capita than Arabs who are living under the Palestinian Authority or under the Gaza or under Hamas. And when you take polls of Israeli Arabs, many of whom are not particularly fond of the state of Israel, almost zero of them wish to actually relocate.
Okay, so you sent me your proof. So the first is a short about the outfall of the bombings that were happening in the Gaza Strip. And the second one is, I'm not going to show it on stream because I don't want, just in case it gets violent. The second one is somebody gets pushed onto the ground. I'm assuming it was an Israeli person pushing a Palestinian on the ground. Okay, so clearly you have a mental deficiency. What you said was that the Israeli government was actively dragging Palestinians out of their home, raping and murdering their women and children in the same way Hamas was doing. That's your claim. Your proof is the unfortunate reality that Hamas used their own civilians as a shield for their weapons caches and their hideouts, and there were unfortunate, horrible civilian casualties because Hamas, again, violently raped and murdered Israeli people. And you showed me that and someone getting pushed on the ground in a heated confrontation. Okay. So I'm going to assume you're a fucking idiot. This is what I'm talking about. You people are stupid. It's okay to disagree and, you wanted to support a terrorist like that's totally fine. That's a terrorist organization that would have you killed in a second. Like that's fine. You want to be a fucking dumb, then you don't. But you just compared a woman getting pushed on the ground to fucking rape. I don't understand. Like how do you engage with yourself? How do you wake up every day and go, "Fuck, I actually function"? You're being stupid. You're just being dumb. You said that there was a fucking Israeli government was doing this shit. What are you talking about? I don't even understand. How did you? This was your source was 2 Instagram posts. You're fucking so stupid. How do you live with yourself is the real question. How do you wake up every day and go, you know what, I'm a productive member of society today? I couldn't be me. It's fucking wild, brother. It's fucking wild.
To any of these areas, because economic development is economic development. The way out of this is that, but in order for that to happen, the people on the other side of the table have to actually agree that economic development is a worthwhile thing, is an end goal. And this goes back to the original point that I was making, is that we in the West, we believe that economic development worthwhile, that what we are all seeking is the same sort of peaceful, decent life where we leave each other alone and get to live our lives. I think that we all agree on that. But there's a group of people who absolutely do not agree with that, and they don't care about the level of economic development. They would rather live. I mean, Hamas would rather that its own citizens live in poverty and penury and orient themselves against the extermination of the Jews than that economic development even be allowed to take place. I mean, I know everyone in the Israeli government, I promise you, everyone in the Israeli government, right to left, would love nothing better than economic development of the people surrounding them so they don't have to send their sons and daughters to go fight and die in Gaza.
Do you believe in the concept of a two-state solution?
I mean, if there were a party on the other side to negotiate with, and if the possibility of a two-state solution was real, sure. I mean, but the question is, how realistic is that? Negotiations cannot be the cure-all. You have to have a partner on the other side of the table. The entire premise of the Oslo Accords is that you could take an actual terrorist.
I don't know that Ben actually thinks that there could be some kind of like a two, that both Palestinians and Israelis can live together in peace. I don't know what his perspective is. But if you wanted to get, because I don't know if he would genuinely give his perspective here. But again, you need to actually have a not terrorist organization to come to terms with. So, yeah.
And Yasser Arafat, you could negotiate with him. You can make a deal with him. And this would magically cure the situation. Well, a deal is not capable of being cut with literally anyone. That's not the way any of this works. So in order for there to be any sort of long-term peace, including a Palestinian state, there would have to be a complete difference in leadership in these areas. And that would actually require Palestinian moderates to take the floor. The Palestinian Authority is not a moderate group. Islamic Jihad is a terrorist group. Hamas is a terrorist group. And until that changes, nothing's going to change. And by the way, there is the possibility of that change. If you had told me 10 years ago that there would be Saudi-Israeli normalization on the table, I would have laughed in your face. If you told me that Israel would have been able to cut peace deals with the UAE and with Morocco, I would have scoffed. And I think everyone would have scoffed. So there is that possibility. But again, you cannot make peace with a side that wants to murder you. That is not a possibility.
Well, on that point, all I would say to that is I'm an Irish Catholic and we had the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Different circumstances. I'm not going to try and equate the two. But there you had people on both sides trying to kill each other. You had the IRA trying to kill civilians indiscriminately to make their political points. And in the end, a peace deal was achieved, but it was achieved by people sitting down opposite people they knew had been killing civilians and killing people on their side. You even had the Queen meeting Martin McGuinness and Gerry Adams, who were in McGuinness's case, the former chief of staff of the IRA. He ordered some of the most appalling atrocities. The Queen, one of her own relatives, was blown to pieces, Lord Mountbatten, by the IRA, but she still met with them. I was actually at number 10 Downing Street when Tony Blair met.
Sure. I mean, guess that's fair to say, like, okay, you'd have to come to terms with the maybe. I don't know, man. I don't know. Maybe you could come to terms with fucking Hamas. Sure. If they're willing to do so, I guess. But I don't know. I guess I'm a little skeptical of it, considering the horrific things. They don't seem to value human life, so, but okay.
McGuinness and Adams on the steps for the first time in 70 years. As the members of Sinn Féin, and shook their hands. I was next in to see him in his office, and it was an extraordinary moment to watch. And it was a moment many people thought would never happen. Do you see any parallel there in terms of what could be achieved with Israel and Palestine?
Only if the leadership changes. Only if the leadership changes on the Palestinian side. That is the only way that happens. And again, the difference here is that the IRA had territorial ambitions. Hamas does not have territorial ambitions. They have genocidal ambitions. The Palestinian Authority...
is that true? They don't have territorial... I feel like that might not be true. I don't really know. I feel like they probably do have territorial ambitions. They might want all of the territory, but I mean, I imagine that's some form of an ambition, no?
Has been offered multiple deals over multiple decades, and they've rejected, without counteroffers, virtually every deal they have ever been offered. Islamic Jihad is a terrorist group. Again, if the IRA was dedicated to the complete slaughter and eradication of every non-Irish Britisher in the UK, that would be the equivalent of Hamas. And that would not be a negotiating position because, again, could there be successful negotiations? It depends on the partner.
Right.
I mean, the example that you're using is the best example of sides that are incredibly far apart coming together. But here we are talking about one side that, simple premise, if Israel put down all of its guns tomorrow, every Jew in the region would be slaughtered. If Hamas put down all of its guns tomorrow, Israel would leave the Gaza Strip alone. It is that simple.
Let me ask you got into a Twitter spat with Andrew Tate yesterday. He's a converted Muslim. He'd been doing a lot of...
Yeah, he weaponizes that religion is what he actually does to make it seem like he's converted. He's a sex trafficking, rapist, abusing piece of shit. So I can see why maybe he sympathizes with Hamas.
Supportive tweets for the Palestinians. And he tweeted at you at one stage, Mr. Tough Guy, let me assure you, as someone who's done his own fighting as opposed to excitedly encouraging others to do it for him while sitting at home on a comfy chair, peace is always worth a conversation. What was that spat about? Why did you engage with him? What do you feel about that?
Well, what I feel about that is that he was tweeting that immediately, like as terrorists were still running around in southern Israel. That was on October 10th. And he was still tweeting while the bodies were fresh and warm in the streets. Peace is, you cannot make peace with people who murdered your children and burned their bodies. You can't do that. I mean, this rush to Israel, the murder happens and you immediately say, okay, well, guys, now truce, now ceasefire. That is not, no state worth its salt. No government on earth would allow this kind of insanity. No government on earth. And no government on earth would listen to nonsense about how you immediately have to seek peace with a group that seeks your direct extermination. Again, I can't emphasize enough. Israel turned over the Gaza Strip to Gazans in 2005. Hamas has governed the area since 2006. The year is currently 2023. Israel has endured round after round of rocket fire on its major cities for literally almost 20 years. And now the idea is the minute that Gazan terrorists rush through the border and murder people in their beds, that's the time for a peace conversation. That's the time for a peace conversation. By the way, and I'm not going to be lectured on morality and toughness by Andrew Tate, whose great idea of toughness and morality is pimping women and then bragging about it on air and trying to quasi-walk it back while simultaneously maintaining many of the same positions and flexing his biceps.
I mean, he's got a huge...
like I said before, man, finally he's decided to stand up to this fucking piece of shit. I mean, holy fuck.
Huge following, as you know,
Who cares?
especially online. Is it dangerous? Is it reckless that he's able to tweet from house arrest still? Of course, in Romania, that he can tweet on...
That's one of the funniest things. People will be like, oh, Andrew Tate actually is free now. He won. It's like, dude, he's on house arrest. What are you talking about? You fucking idiot.
Something like this and have the kind of influence that he has?
Listen, everyone should be able to tweet whatever it is that they want. I'm all for an open discourse, even with people who I think are dead wrong on a lot of these issues. But Andrew Tate is dead wrong on a lot of these issues. And the particularly...
Yeah, Andrew Tate's a fucking moron. Like, he's completely an unintelligent idiot. He doesn't care about Muslim people either. He literally takes advantage of the religion to try to play a fucking optics game. He doesn't care about it. Like, people, I don't know why people like think now that he's converted that all of a sudden he respects religion. Of course not. He doesn't care at all. It's just a way for him to look like a better person. That's it.
Ridiculous posturing.
And then even if he's found guilty, he'll just be like, oh, I'm religious now. Like, I've changed. All of a sudden the Reformation will happen.
You're very tough when you want people to make peace with terrorists who just murdered their children. Very, very tough.
You mentioned Iran earlier. President Biden yesterday came out, 10-minute speech, sounded very tough and very supportive of Israel, but never once mentioned Iran. Was that a failure by him, or are they waiting to establish concrete evidence of Iran's involvement?
Well, it's probably that, and also, obviously you want to pace yourself when it comes to the way that you speak about these things.
So I think there's a good reason he could have done that and a bad reason that he could have done that. And the bad reason is pretty obvious, which is that the United States has unfrozen $6 billion in assets to flood into Iran in return for hostages. That money is fungible, and there's every possibility that money...
Yeah, just to be clear, they didn't give them the money. They unfroze the assets. Like, it was part of a sanction, and they were able to come to a deal for that, right?
Flowing into Iran since the weakening of sanctions has contributed to Iran's spread of terror. That is not only a possibility, that's a probability, and everyone knows it. So if you avoid mentioning Iran, then presumably it avoids blowback. That is the bad reason. The good reason might be that the United States wants to take down the temperature in the region. So
Sure,
right now,
that makes perfect
geopolitically,
sense.
this is a contained conflict. This is Israel versus Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and everyone of good heart on every side should hope that it remains that way. If Hezbollah, which is on Israel's northern border and is an Iranian client, Hezbollah is a massive and significantly more powerful than Hamas terrorist group that exists and has say in the government of Lebanon. Again, Israel's surrounded on a lot of sides by terrorist groups that masquerade as government. Hezbollah has about 150,000 much more sophisticated rockets than Hamas pointed at northern Israel. Everyone understands that if Hezbollah, which would only do this at the behest of Iran, if Hezbollah were to get in, Israel would then be stretched militarily to the point where they would not have any choice but to go full force. And what that means is that all of the talk right now about the supposed disproportionate force that Israel is using in the Gaza Strip, talk with which I wildly disagree, that will all go out the window, because once you are stretched to the point of extermination, all bets are off, and the Israeli Air Force will have to be unleashed on the southern border of Lebanon. At that point, you would have to imagine that Bashar Assad in Syria starts to get active, Iran starts to get active. So one of the things that the possible good reason why he didn't mention Iran is because he's attempting to keep Iran out of the war. That basically the idea would be, he did say in the speech that any other group that wants to get in, don't. America, to its great credit, to our great credit, we've stationed a battle carrier, an aircraft carrier outside of Lebanon in the Mediterranean, and basically said to Hezbollah that they should not get in. That is, in fact, the best available move. So again, there's a very plausible bad reason why he didn't mention Iran, which is to avoid the blowback from his own idiotic Iran policy. And there's a possible good reason, which is that he's attempting to avoid the broadening of the conflict.
Donald Trump says, as he's
Well, it's possible that both of them. What did Donald Trump say?
to do with these crises, that it would never have happened if he was president.
Okay.
Do you think that may have some truth?
I think that Donald Trump is using this as an opportunity to get elected. Him saying that is just a way for him to be part of the public speech. He doesn't mean anything that he says. He doesn't care. He doesn't care about Iran, or excuse me, he doesn't care about Palestinians. He doesn't care about Israelis. He's just trying to get himself into the conversation, into the public bid, so that people will look at that. And some idiots will be like, yeah, that's probably true, so.
I think there's some truth to that, for sure. I think that Iran has seen weakness.
Maybe.
Iran saw an opportunity to prevent the Saudis from coming into the Abraham Accords, and they thought that they could push where they saw mush. I mean, the withdrawal from Afghanistan made America look weak. The continuous...
Yeah, but maybe I'm wrong. Weren't conservatives like begging for that as well? I mean, it didn't help. I mean, the second that we left Afghanistan, what happened? Fucking all women had their rights almost immediately taken away. They're not allowed to go to fucking college or anything anymore, university, whatever they call it. I mean, they were oppressed so incredibly fucking instantaneously. So
dealings between the United States and Iran, despite Iran's openly genocidal intentions with regard to Israel, has made America look weak. The fact that Robert Malley, who is one of the chief negotiators for the United States, was apparently co-opted by Iranian intelligence groups, makes the Americans look particularly weak. And so appearances of weakness in the Middle East matter an awful lot. It is not politics in Western states, where we try to negotiate, we try to have discussions. That is not how politics works in the Middle East. It is a place where strength is really the only coin of the realm.
There is a theory that Hamas have done this spectacularly awful act of terrorism deliberately on a scale that would goad Israel into overreacting and spark a much wider war.
I mean, I think that there's probably truth to that. I think that Hamas, I think that's what Iran wants. I'm not sure that Hamas wanted that. I think Hamas doesn't want to be wiped off the earth, which they probably will be and ought to be. But I think that Iran's hope was that Israel would have to go in incredibly strong into the Gaza Strip, and this would provide internal pressure in Saudi Arabia to prevent them from forming an alliance brokered by the Americans with the Israelis. I think that was probably the geopolitical reason for that. With that said, that does not mean that Israel has any other choice. Again, if suddenly 1,500 terrorists flooded into Great Britain and proceeded to murder 15 to 20,000 people, because again, Israel's a tiny, tiny country. It has 9 million people. If those numbers were made proportionate, if tens of thousands of people were slaughtered in Britain by a group of terrorists, I doubt that there'd be a lot of British citizens who are sitting around worrying about proportionality or worrying about the geopolitical consequences of protecting their own citizenry.
There is an interesting contradiction, I would argue, that a lot of conservatives in America, a lot of Republicans, have, including a number of presidential candidates from Ron DeSantis to Trump and others, they have signaled that they would want to severely curtail, if not stop altogether, support for Ukraine, and yet Ukraine was invaded by Russia.
Yeah, that's because conservatives are pussies when it comes to Ukraine. That's it. We should support Ukraine and we should support Israel.
Russia. A lot of people slaughtered, continue to be slaughtered. Is there not a contradiction there that these Republicans would be full square behind Israel when it happens to them, but not full square behind Ukraine?
I mean, yes, there's a contradiction. It depends on sort of what is being said about Ukraine, and it runs the gamut. And some of the candidates that you've talked about have talked about ending aid completely to Ukraine. Some have talked about continuing aid to Ukraine and pursuing some sort of deal with the Russians that allows them to keep part of the Donbass and Crimea, which I think is a completely different story and is an actual off-ramp. But yes, anybody who is sympathetic to Russia in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and then is sympathetic to Israel in this current conflict, that is a bizarre position to take. And again, I think that they're serious. America's a sovereign country. It has its own concerns that are not Israel's concerns, and it has its own concerns that are not Ukraine's concerns, and those don't always line up. But when it comes to a possible contradiction between a completely isolationist position on Ukraine and an interventionist position or a supportive position on Israel, of course, those things could clearly be in conflict. In my own position, by the way, for what it's worth, since as you know, Piers, I do this for a living, my own position on Ukraine has been that the United States should continue to supply Ukraine with the support necessary in order.
Oh, has he? I thought that his position was like what a lot of other dumb fucking conservatives were, which is to not support Ukraine. So I guess I was wrong.
To preserve its government and to preserve its territory. And meanwhile, there need to be serious talks about what exactly an off-ramp looks like in Ukraine, because virtually no one has spelled out exactly what that looks like. And virtually no one believes at this point that Ukraine is going to be able to completely take back both the Donbass and the Crimea region. That is not
it's
nearly
very
the same
complicated.
thing as cut off funding
having
for
been
Ukraine.
to Ukraine and interviewed President Zelensky and met a lot of people there, and that was quite a while ago, there was an unbelievably steely resolve, and I would say the same resolve that Israel has about ceding any land now to the Palestinians. It's like they just don't want to give an inch of land away to the Russians. That was to a man and woman that I met out there.
I have an enormous amount of sympathy for that position. Again, that position does not necessarily dictate American policy any more than Israel's position with regard to, say, the so-called occupied territories, disputed territories, should necessarily dictate America's position on that. There are realistic consequences and concerns to be had on foreign policy. But if the point that you're making is that lack of moral support in an invasion of a sovereign country by Russia is in contradiction with moral support for Israel in this, I would say, yeah, I mean, there's certainly inconsistency there.
I guess that's interesting too, because there hasn't been currently, I don't think, any conversation about sending supplies to Israel, which, by the way, we probably, maybe we should. Maybe we should do that. I wouldn't be against that. I mean, I'm totally not. If they need help, we should supply them with help. So,
the other inconsistency and contradiction, it seems to me, is the reaction of the world when George Floyd was murdered, which was a despicable killing.
The fuck?
And the police officer concerned is now serving a life sentence, quite rightly. But that sparked enormous global protests over America, over the UK, everywhere. With people marching in protest at what they perceive to be a racist murder of one person. And yet the reaction within hours of what happened here, where, as we knew at the time, nearly 1,000 people in Israel had been murdered, some in the most utterly horrific circumstances. The reaction was that, yes, there were big protests again, but they weren't really protests, they were marches of celebration. In America, in the UK, they marched down my local high street, celebrating what had happened, pro-Palestinian marches. I
mean, there's nothing wrong with a pro-Palestinian march, though I don't know why you would march right now, because that would effectively communicate to an extent that you're siding with Hamas more than anything else. I mean, listen, I think that there's a big sentiment in the West of anti-Westness. That's really what it boils down to. People in the West, they've taken the reasonable understanding of we need to criticize and we need to do better when it comes to some of the ways that we interact and some of the ways our systems interact, because we have broken systems, and that's turned into a very anti-American or anti-Western sentiment. Somehow we are so entitled and deluded that we look at other countries like Palestine that has a terrorist organization that runs the country, and we've gone like, oh, like this is okay, and whatever they do is justifiable because they were oppressed in some other way. But the reality is they have no value of human life. They don't care about anything. They don't care about you. I mean, it's just, that's pretty much all it is. It's not so much like pro-Palestinian. It's more just anti-West. That's really all it is. There's a huge anti-West sentiment in the West from people on the left and people on the right. It's actually very interesting. It's bizarre too.
Not extraordinary.
Jew hatred is a very real thing. It's a very real thing. And we've obscured it with a lot of talk about Zionism and anti-Zionism, and we've obscured it with a lot of talk about geopolitics and context. But in the end, Jew hatred is quite real. And when you see crowds in Sydney chanting, gas the Jews, not free the occupied territories, not make a peace deal, gas the Jews.
The George Floyd comparison feels like such. Well, yeah, that is bullshit. Only because like that happened in our country, right? So obviously we're going to be a little more active about it than something happening in another country. It makes sense as to why we in general protested. But it's interesting if it is true that there were like pro-Palestinian parades or whatever they refer. I've never seen it before, so if it's true, that is pretty disgusting. But
Jews, I'm not sure what we're supposed to read into that other than people mean what they say when they say gas the Jews.
Yeah, I mean, and that's exactly what they mean. I mean, this is Nazi language. I mean, but as you say, the difference between this and the Nazis tried to keep the secret, whereas this is all in plain sight. I mean, the idea of people doing this in cities like Sydney and London and New York, it's actually terrifying. And I say that again, I'm an Irish Catholic, I'm not Jewish. I feel terrified for Jewish people. Like you say, there's only 15 million Jewish people in the world. It must be, when this kind of thing happens in such an indiscriminate manner, it must be genuinely terrifying for people.
For sure. And obviously when you see marches of support, the question is always asked, how could the Holocaust have happened? And the answer is this way, when people are actively in favor of Jews being murdered simply for being Jews. And again, it's easy. People have an amazing ability to justify whatever it is that they're thinking or feeling at a given time. But if you can find a way to justify yourself out of the murder of babies in their cribs, I have a hard time figuring that it's anything other than Jew hatred. And so if, as a Jew, as a person who, is very strongly Jewish, I'm very active in my Jewish community, a person with 4 kids and a wife and parents and sisters and all of this, obviously Jews feel like they are at risk everywhere because of this sort of activity. And I will say there's an amazing double standard when it comes to anti-Semitism and its treatment in the media. The way that it seems to work in the media these days is if somebody politically says something about George Soros, then they will be labeled a Nazi. And if somebody actually says I am a Nazi, then they will say, well, there's probably some sort of justification over territorial disputes.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I want to end, Ben.
Probably a little more complicated than that, but sure.
On one positive note, and it's a montage we have of support for the Jewish people and for Israel. Let's take a look.
Wow. It's just a montage of people flying the Israeli flag on their buildings. I mean, I thought it was going to be a little more, yeah, Israel, fucking get them! Like, that's what I was expecting. I want like a whole fucking football team to be like, yeah! But it's also supposed to be somber, and so my reaction to this.
So Ben, that last image was of the Brandenburg Gate, which of course we saw back in the 30s with
very inappropriate
Nazi swastikas all over it, and today the Israel flag is emblazoned across it proudly and supportively. I mean, amid all the Jew hating, and you're right, that's what it is, there's also been an amazing outpouring of support.
And that is incredible, and we who are Jews obviously appreciate that. And I would just like to say at the very end here that must be translated into allowing Israel to do what must be done to protect her own citizenry, because goodwill only goes so far as the actual protection of human lives. And if the Jews were to rely on the goodwill of the world over the course of history, it would have gone very poorly for them. That's why the state of Israel exists. It exists so that never again is never again. And in order for that to be a reality, the IDF, the state of Israel, has to be able to defend itself, has to be able to defend its citizenry and protect them from the kind of slaughter and savagery that we saw over the weekend.
Ben Shapiro, thank you very much indeed for your time today. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I'm agreeing with Ben on this one, baby. I gotta take a piss. Okay.